Welcome to the 2020 Watershed Congress. This is Wednesday, September 23rd, day 3 of our virtual Watershed Congress week. We are happy that you are joining us again today, and so are my dogs that you can hear in the background. The Watershed Congress is organized by the Delaware Riverkeeper Network in collaboration with many other organizations. My name is Cherry Town, and I serve as Executive Director of the Delaware Riverkeeper Network. I'm your moderator today for this session, Fishable and Swimmable Waters, Recreation and Stream Health Survey Findings. We're pleased to present our speakers for this session. Meghan Kelly is Principal of Green Motivate, where she assists environmental organizations Principal of Green Motivate, where she assists environmental organizations in designing, implementing, and evaluating programs with a goal of behavior change. Doug O'Malley is the State Director of Environment New Jersey, and Dr. Erik Silldorff is the Restoration Director and Senior Scientist at the Delaware Riverkeeper Network. Now I'm going to turn it over to our presenters. Our first speaker today will be Meghan Kelly.
Great, thanks, Cherry. I'm going to go ahead and get my... All right, yeah, so as Cherry mentioned, this is our talk today is Fishable and Swimmable Waters, Recreation and Stream Health, and it's survey findings from a survey that I assisted the Delaware Riverkeeper Network and Environment New Jersey in conducting last year. And I'm excited to share the results with you. I helped to conduct the survey, and then I'll pass it off later on to Doug and Erik to explain how these results are being used. So first, just a quick overview. As I mentioned, Doug and Erik will go through some of the background of the Clean Water Act and kind of what spurred interest in running this type of survey, and also talk about the objectives of the survey. And then I will get into the methodology of how it was run, and of course the findings and who sort of made up our survey pool. And then Doug and Erik will talk about how these findings are being applied. So I will go ahead and pass it off to Doug to talk about the background.
Super, thank you so much, Meghan. And thank you to Erik, who we'll be hearing from shortly. And thank you to Cherry for kicking things off. And really, most importantly, a big thank you to everyone that's joining. I know there's kind of a lot involved in the Congress. I'm obviously biased, but I think I'm especially excited for this presentation because it's not only obviously a conversation of the survey that the Delaware Riverkeeper Network and Environment New Jersey engage. It's also just a broader conversation on how we see our waterways and how more accurately the public and our members see the Delaware River and its estuaries and tributaries. But also more accurately how we as a culture approach our water bodies. And I wanted to kind of start and frame the conversation just with a kind of a brief iteration of the bedrock, really the bedrock holy grail for environmental protection for waterways, and that's the Clean Water Act. And inevitably, we always talk about how the Clean Water Act was passed in 1972. We're nearly at the 50th anniversary. I think it's important just to reflect just how revolutionary the Clean Water Act was and just how bad our water quality was at the time that led Congress to taking such a aggressive and visionary piece of legislation. First off, the Clean Water Act was not passed overnight. It was passed over essentially a 2-year-long process, spearheaded by then Senator Ed Muskie from Maine. And the idea is that you really did have a crisis, right? So when we talk about the Cuyahoga River in Ohio catching on fire, that obviously galvanized public opinion, but kind of closer to home, in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, we really did have, dead zones for our water quality. And so the goal of the Clean Water Act was in many ways still is revolutionary. It was saying that all waters were to be fishable and swimmable, essentially within a decade. It stated that by 1985, there'd be zero water pollution discharge. And we think about the gypsies permits, right? It's discharge elimination, right? So that is kind of written into the permitting process. And then obviously the Clean Water Act also pushed to prohibit discharge of toxic amounts of toxic pollutants into our waterways. Now, we know close to 50 years later, we are obviously not there, right? More than half of our U.S. streams and river miles, and up to 70% of lakes and ponds are continue to violate water quality standards. But the Clean Water Act really is the lodestar to kind of think about what our waterways should be. And I think that's what is kind of guiding this process for us, is that we want to ensure that the U.S. waterways, as the Clean Water Act stated, are there for the protection and propagation of fish, shellfish, and wildlife, and recreation in and on the water whenever attainable. And those are, that's a little bureaucratic speak. It's not flowery language, though. That is a promise that our waterways can be used by the public. And what we wanted to do with the survey is to understand how our supporters think about these terms and how they use, how they use our waterways, and specifically how they use the Delaware River and the waterways that surround it, to get a sense of, what use do they use, and how do they think about these items. I wanted to let Erik to kind of chime on this, especially just to talk just how far the Delaware River itself has come and recovered.
Yeah, and Doug, that point is fantastic, that it's not just that the Cuyahoga River was on fire, right? The Schuylkill River was also on fire. And for up to 5 or 6 months out of the year, the Delaware River around Philadelphia and Camden and all the way down to Wilmington literally was a dead river. There was no oxygen. There was no aquatic life in this river. And so the last 50 years have seen tremendous improvements, and we really should celebrate those improvements. But at the same time, those promises from 1972 still have not been fulfilled. Not just in terms of we still have problems, we have discharges of toxics and pollutants into our waterways, but we still haven't even designated some of our waterways as fishable and swimmable. And this is really remarkable that 50 years later, we still are arguing about whether or not we want to say, yeah, in Philadelphia, in Camden, in Chester, Pennsylvania, do we want people to be able to touch that water and be exposed to that or not? We thought that those things should be long put to bed, and we should really be just fighting for the restoration rather than whether or not those are the goals. And so despite the fact that there were really great ambitions and there have been a lot of progress, there still are substantial battles ahead, and there is substantial resistance to actually fulfilling the promises of the 1972 Clean Water Act. And so this survey helped to set the foundation for those battles ahead. What is the understanding of our publics and all the individuals who will be fighting for these improvements, and how best to take that to help restore and protect these various waterways.
So just a final thought here, Erik. And this story is not apocryphal. You literally could smell the Delaware River from an airplane because of the amount of untreated sewage that was in the river. And this is not hundreds of years ago. This is 50 years ago. So this is within a lifetime. Obviously the culture has changed, and I would argue the culture of our approach to the use of the Delaware has changed drastically, to the extent that people, fish in the river, they recreate on the river, they swim in the river. And I would also argue, based on what you're saying, Erik, that our policymakers haven't caught up to the reality of the uses, the existing uses that are occurring in the Delaware. We wanted to kind of have the survey to capture, what was the use of the river up and down, right? And so often when we think of the Delaware and recreation, we think of the upper Delaware. The reality, I think, is it's much more varied and complex. And we wanted to try to capture that. And that's why we're kind of excited for you to come along, with us on this journey to figure out what does the public think, especially the informed public and members of our two respective organizations. So with that, kind of turn it, we should go on to the next slide. So our survey objectives, I think are pretty clear. We wanted, I was referencing earlier, kind of the cultural change we're seeing. We wanted to get a sense of, how much people are using the Delaware and its in its, kind of immediate waterways for recreational activities. How many of those are viewed in terms of kind of primary contact? What does the public, or in this case, really the informed public, think about the best ways that fish and shellfish and wildlife are being protected? Erik, has a career based on figuring out the aquatic life of our health of our waterways, right? Most people are not bug people, right? But we did want to get a sense from the public how much they thought about the ecology of the river. because in many ways, the public, especially the informed public that is using the river and its immediate estuaries and waterways, those are the people we want to hear from. And then we also wanted to understand from the public, the concept of swimmable and fishable. What did they think that meant? How do they value that? How do they define that? And then we certainly wanted, this is obviously not just an academic exercise. I think that's incredibly important. We wanted to understand from members of the informed public and from our membership the levels of support regarding spending and regulations to improve water quality. So we've seen a lot of progress. Obviously, no one's smelling the Delaware River from an airplane anymore, but we are very clear that there's a lot more work that needs to happen. And regulators, might not necessarily agree with everything that our two organizations advocate for. And so we wanted to get a sense of where, our broader membership and the informed public stood on these issues of increased spending and increased regulations to improve water quality so that we could achieve those visionary and in many ways revolutionary goals of the Clean Water Act. And then Erik, I'm sure you have a couple of things to say here too. So
yeah, and I just want to emphasize what you've already highlighted, Doug, which is that these battles that we're talking about, these improvements for rivers like the Delaware River and for some of our tributaries like the Frankfurt and Tacony Creek, as well as a number of others around, particularly our urban areas, these are within reach, right? We're not talking about things that might take another 50 years to attain. We have the technology. We have already demonstrated that we can improve these streams and rivers and water bodies throughout our nation. And it really is a question of, like you were saying, Doug, our policymakers understanding that that these are already existing uses. People are already valuing these streams, and it really is partly just getting those policymakers to catch up to the reality that these are indeed existing uses, and that means certain things under the Clean Water Act. So it is also important, in addition to saying that there are important challenges ahead, but that these challenges are well within our reach and really should almost be automatic. And so it's to emphasize just how exciting that is to be thinking about the full benefits of the Clean Water Act for every stream and every river that we all know and love.
Super. So next I want to turn it over to Meghan to kind of run through the methodology of the survey and to kind of do a really deep dive so all of you can kind of understand what we're asking our members and the responses that we heard back.
Great. Thanks, Doug. Thanks, Erik. Yeah, so getting into what do we actually do to get all this information we're trying to obtain from our audience. So we ran this survey at this point now last year, so July through August of 2019. We had it open for 4 weeks, and we had a population, an audience size of about 20,000 contacts from DRN, from the Delaware Riverkeeper Network. And DRN primarily promoted that by their newsletter, email, postcard, all of your social media, all of that website, got all of that information out to encourage people to participate. We also had an incentive, a chance to win a gift card to further encourage participation. We were aiming for around 377 responses, and that's based on wanting to have a strong confidence level that it was representative of our audience as a whole. So 95% confidence level at a 5% margin of error. And I will go through, when I go through the results, just want to note that all the statistical differences, and I can get into it if people have more questions, but were all conducted at a 95% confidence level unless otherwise noted. And so what did we actually get? So we did achieve our goal of at least 377 responses. We had a little more than that, a little over 400. Of course, some people didn't answer every question. So there's a few questions where it's a little bit lower than that. And even though our audience was contacts from Delaware Riverkeeper Network, not only 71% of them identified as being DRN members or supporters, and 17% identified as being Environment New Jersey members or supporters. Obviously some overlap there, and some folks that don't identify as either, which is good to be able to gather their information as well. Survey took folks about 7 minutes, so wasn't too burdensome for people to complete. And as I go through the results, I'm going to you'll see a few poll questions pop up for participants. Mostly, this is to both keep you engaged, but also to kind of give you a sense of the questions that actual participants in the survey completed as well. So let's jump into it. So I'll start off with an easy one. You should have a poll pop up on your screen. Go ahead and answer that. Do you like to fish? Keep it simple. Give folks a few more seconds to answer. I see the exciting results rolling in. All right. Let's see, and I will share those results with you. So this is interesting because it's about 50-50, 46% said yes, 54% said no. Let me just close this out for me. And yeah, interesting, that's about what we found from our wider survey as well. About 45% said that they do like to go fishing. And so to back up a little bit, so we asked this first question really to get a sense. We asked them if they like to go fishing, and then asking in particular what types of fish they do like to catch. And deer and especially was interested in this question just to kind of get a sense of their audience, you know, or is this an activity people are participating in? And then in particular, are there certain types of anglers, certain types of fish that people are really most keen on catching? And also kind of, they were a little bit interested in exploring whether or not there was any other kind of relationship between interest in fish that require cleaner water, kind of looking at that kind of diversity piece as well. So you'll see here, yeah, about half of our participants like to go fishing. Most popular fish to catch were, so we have rainbow trout and striper were kind of the top there. It was a little bit more popular with the younger crowd, 18 to 44, and with those identifying as male. And deer and supporters especially were interested in rainbow trout and sunfish. So, and I should also say, so that was kind of like a easier question. So some of the questions, and this is just kind of if you were an organization that does like to run surveys or is interested in it, you don't want to start with like a more longer, elaborate question. It just kind of gets people more engaged or could turn people off on the reverse. If it's something like, do you like to go fishing? Yes or no? Keep it simple. So our next question that we asked was related to participating in what we called water-based recreational activities. And so this is something Doug and Erik were talking about earlier, kind of just getting a sense of what sort of activities people are participating in the Delaware River in particular. So we asked how important it was to participate, and the top activities here were wading, swimming, and kayaking. Most people found it fairly important to participate in those, less so with jet skiing and boating. And as far as looking at our cross tabs is for groups, so wading, swimming, and kayaking was more important to women, fishing more important to men. And then we also some breakdown around age and income and things, if you're interested in looking at that. So digging into those activities a little bit deeper, we then asked folks what activities do they consider it likely that their head may go underwater or that they might accidentally swallow water. So I'm going to go ahead and let you guys participate in this first. Okay. Now there's 10 choices here, so scroll down. So you're going to choose, hopefully it's allowing you to choose more than one, but choose all of the activities in which you think you might basically be more immersed in water. maybe a few more seconds. So make sure, again, make sure you scroll down to see all of the choices. Maybe a few more seconds here. Okay, I'm gonna end the poll. So most folks, and let me actually go to the next, hopefully it will let me, there we go. So most folks agree that, yeah, you're gonna be immersed in the water if you're swimming, snorkeling, tubing 63%, so water skiing, not so much, it looks like folks said, for wading. I'm looking at your results, wading, sailing, canoeing. And then interestingly, again, it looks like folks are a little bit half and half. So maybe not for stand-up paddleboarding. Even tubing, I guess, is a little bit split. Kayaking for sure, 46%. And again, this is very similar to what we found. So this is really looking at primary and secondary contact without actually using that language in the question, because it's a bit of a more technical term. People might not know what we mean. We asked, do you think you'll get wet if you do these activities? Do you think your head will go underwater or you'll swallow water? So again, in our results, people found that, yeah, there was primary contact with swimming, snorkeling, and tubing. Not so much with wading, jet skiing, fishing, rowing, sailing, powerboating. And respondents were split for, just like you all, for stand-up paddleboarding, water skiing, kayaking, and canoeing. And Doug and Erik will get into this in more detail a little bit later. But yeah, this is really important because it's showing that for water that may or may not be designated as allowing these primary contact activities, people might be getting wet anyway, right? People might be going underwater. And so that sort of contact might be taking place. So really important to know that it's not sort of clear cut necessarily, whether an activity is secondary or primary. Depends on people's experience, activity level, all of that. We also asked for this question when people were participating in these activities. And this kind of breakdown, I believe, is based on how strict regulations already are during that time period. The assumption, I guess, is that, you know, most people between May and September is when most people are participating, and that's what we did find. But there are some outliers, you know, so, you know, if 16% are doing these activities in March or April, 19% in October and November, that's just important to keep in mind that if regulations are changing based on time of year, we might need to be a little bit more careful about that. And I'm not going to go over all of the kind of comparison between groups, but if folks have more questions about that, I'm happy to answer them. And this one, and those are all on the right side of your screen. But like in this case, yeah, an older population was more likely to not participate in any of the activities at all. So there's definitely like an age breakdown based in how people are participating. So the next question we asked was to get a better sense of what participants, in the survey believe that signs that best show that fish, shellfish, and wildlife are being protected and their reproduction supported. And there weren't really any right or wrong answers in this question. So we actually asked folks to choose the top 3 that they felt best showed this. And we really just want to get a sense of what are people thinking about, what are they prioritizing, what do they understand to be signs of a healthy stream. And so you can see here the top choices, we saw 72% for what said wildlife are healthy and plentiful. Number 2 was saying that early life stages of insects that are sensitive to pollution are found easily in the stream. And then 51% said a healthy community of multiple fish species is abundant. And we really saw that kind of people seem to really value, you know, diversity as far as those top ones, kind of looking at the whole span of things from wildlife to insects to fish. We saw a less of an emphasis on, only 14% said the emphasis of different sizes of mussels found easily Also 38% for threatened and endangered species begin to show recovery. So this seems to be like perhaps less of a priority for people. So if it's something that your organizations are interested in focusing on, that might be something that needs to kind of be, people need to hear more about or become more educated about. But yeah, just kind of interesting to see kind of the spread. And as far as looking at, did different groups answer questions differently? Females were more likely than males to choose wildlife being healthy and plentiful. A younger age demographic chose that the threatened and endangered species were important. People who were not Delaware Riverkeeper Network supporters were more likely to say that it was important to see that fish and shellfish could be safely eaten. So we only had 2 open-ended questions, meaning like write in whatever you feel is the response. Which again, as far as doing a survey, that's you never want to have too many open-ended questions because a lot of people do tend to skip those. But we really wanted to understand these terms, how people view these terms of fishable waters and swimmable waters. So we'd asked, what does the phrase fishable waters mean to you? And here I don't have all the results here, but I used a sort of word cloud to sort of visually demonstrate what really stood out in people's responses. And this kind of narrows down, kind of highlights how people view this term. Our top words here, you can see you're safe, eat, clean, catch, healthy, really putting an emphasis on the health aspect, of course, catching fish that they can eat. So without giving people the definition from, as defined in the Clean Water Act, people kind of were able to share how they view or how they read this term. And same for swimmable waters. You can see here in top words again: clean, safe, free, sick, health, harmful. So even more of an emphasis here on kind of the health aspect of it, like not just can I go in this water, but can I go in this water and know that I'm going to be safe, know that I'm not going to get sick afterwards, is really the emphasis for folks. So moving on with the fishable and swimmable waters term, we asked folks to indicate how important those things are to them. So let's do another poll. You all can participate. See a poll on your screen right now. Give you a few more seconds. All right. And yeah, not surprisingly, most folks said that fishable waters are extremely important, if not very important, or very important, if not extremely important to them. And yes, you guys are really similar to the results that we found here. So yeah, 61% of our audience that we surveyed said it was very important to have fishable waters, 25% for 61% for extremely, 25% for very, and then a few others. And this wasn't necessarily surprising, given we knew that our audience was mostly DRN and Environment New Jersey supporters, but it's important to highlight and for people to actually think about this term. We asked this question again after that open-ended question, so they had kind of internalized, okay, how am I thinking about fishable waters? How am I thinking about swimmable waters? Is this something I value? And we asked it again. Let me stop sharing that. I'll do one more, last poll. Go ahead and answer the same question, but in terms of swimmable waters. Okay. And yeah, similar results here. We found of all of you, 60, so almost 90% or over 90%, 96% said that it was very important. And yeah, similar results from our audience. So we did find that swimmable waters were rated as slightly more important than fishable waters. Not that surprising, right? Like we know that, you know, not everyone likes fishing, so that might not be as important to them, or not everyone eats fish, or it's something that is a priority, but most people do want the opportunity to be able to swim and, you know, participate in water-based activities without any concerns. And I guess for both fishable and swimmable waters, those that identified as DRN, and I think in some cases Environment New Jersey supporters as well, rated them as significantly more important than those that did not. And then the last set of questions we asked was about the support for spending and for tighter regulations. This first question was about to what extent do you support or oppose new spending to improve the health of waters in your area? And 84% strongly support new spending. In particular, again, DRN and Environment New Jersey supporters more strongly support it compared to non-supporters. And this also wasn't terribly surprising, but it's good to have this kind of information to kind of back up when we do get to the point where we need to have increased spending to improve water health. And also if we had seen, you know, a greater shift to the other side, that would be, you know, something to think about and kind of understand further. And as I mentioned, yes, then we asked about as well, not just more spending, but tighter regulations. And we saw an even greater support here for having tighter regulations to support water health. And it was, again, even more strongly supported by a slightly older respondent, 65 plus DRN supporters, and also women in both cases more strongly support tighter regulations as well as increased spending. And then just lastly, wanted to share some of the demographic questions that we asked. And I said earlier, you know, 71% DRN supporters, 17% ENJ. Our age did skew slightly older, I believe. Let me just double check what I have here. Yeah, mostly we're in the 45 plus range. Most folks have at least a college degree, primarily white, and about split for those identifying as male versus a female, and also higher income. So that is all of our results. And I saw some questions starting to come in. We'll save the questions for the end if you have other particular questions about the results. But now I will pass it off to Doug and Erik to talk about how these results are being used.
Great. Thank you so much, Meghan. You know, there's kind of a lot of information in there to digest. So I know, you know, we did have some questions in the chat already. You know, we're happy to kind of go back and obviously could just kind of share the survey findings. You know, I think we will, you know, as Meghan was saying, you always need to test your assumptions. And I think even, you know, there were kind of some surprises for me in there. Not shocked to hear that our membership wants to see stronger protections and is willing to have increased spending to make that happen. But you know, not everything, you know, not everything there is exactly as I would expect. This is kind of why we do a survey in the first place. But I just wanted to talk a little bit more about kind of the applications of these survey findings, especially based on kind of what I was talking about just at the very kind of beginning of this particular presentation. And I want to reference the picture we have in front of us is one of my kind of favorite places in the state and really the region. And that's kind of our Grand Canyon, right? The Delaware Water Gap, right? You know, this is the kind of famous shot. You know, you got Mount Tammany on the New Jersey side, and Mount Mincy on the Pennsylvania side. You know, this very much is the kind of concept of when we think about, you know, the kind of serene places of the Delaware River. This is what we think of, but the river is obviously much larger than just the Delaware Water Gap. It spans 4 states, and so we want to make sure that we're not just kind of pigeonholing the Delaware, this mighty river, into just kind of one portion. And I think that's especially important when we're considering that intent of the Clean Water Act, which is fishable and swimmable waters. And that was not just that the Delaware Water Gap would be fishable and swimmable, but the entire river. And so just to kind of define that language, and I know it's right here, but I think it's important to put a fine point on it, is that definition meant that a level of water quality should be achieved for the protection and propagation of fish, shellfish, and wildlife, and to provide for recreation in and on the water. And so this language, I think, is incredibly important for us. There's not a qualifier in here. It's saying recreate in the water, but only in the good parts of the river, right? This is why the Clean Water Act really is such a amazing piece of legislation. And then I also just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about the designated uses, because that is just so critical here. And then, this is obviously on the slide as well. But the idea here is that a designated use is reflective of, how the water body is being used, right? And that seems kind of very obvious. But there is there's literally an enforcement mechanism in the Clean Water Act to make sure that happens. The use attainability analysis, I know it kind of sounds a little boring here, but it's saying that this analysis must be conducted every 3 years to re-examine that if new information is available, there needs to be a revision in that standard. And if that new information is available, to specify how fishable and swimmable uses can be attained so that the use can be designated. And so this, I think, is, again, one of the many kind of hidden tools of the Clean Water Act that really shouldn't be that hidden. We want to be obviously ensuring that users of waterways are protected for the ways that they're using our waterways. And then obviously fishable and swimmable should not be some kind of goal we're reaching in 2050. The original intent in the Clean Water Act was obviously more than 35 years ago, but we shouldn't shy away from trying to kind of meet that goal. And so that was part of the reason we wanted to have this survey, to get a sense of how did the informed public, how did our broader membership consider the uses of the Delaware and its tributaries. What did they think of recreational contact? What did they think of fishing? What do they think of kind of the ecological health? So I want to just throw it over to Erik to talk a little bit more about kind of the public perception of of some of these regulatory terms and kind of some of his takeaways from the survey.
Yeah, so I think 2 things that I want to highlight. First of all, there are areas of the main stem Delaware River, particularly the tidal river and some of its tributaries, that don't enjoy these fishable and swimmable protections. The Delaware River Basin Commission, the states of New Jersey and Pennsylvania in particular, have not actually said that these waterways should be fishable and swimmable. And so those are a couple of the fights that we are facing, and really should be things that were well established years ago. And so those are really critical battles ahead of us. And part of that is, as we go into those challenges and try to establish those fishable and swimmable uses, it's understanding where people are at in terms of what they perceive as risks of exposure to various pathogens and poor water quality from various recreational uses. And we'll talk a little bit more about that and the efforts of our 2 organizations, as well as a coalition of a whole group of organizations to engage in those upgrades for recreating in and on the water. But in addition, the aquatic life use. So when we talk about fishable, that use actually isn't just restricted to fishing, but it really deals with that language there in the first capture of for the protection and propagation of fish, shellfish, and wildlife. And one of the really striking results is that, again, this is mostly Environment New Jersey and DRN members, but it is clear that people understand at its core what that means. The protection and propagation of fish, shellfish, and wildlife was captured really well in that survey poll, where people said, yeah, a greater diversity and an abundance of these fish and other aquatic life is that key indicator. Essentially, biodiversity is essentially the best indicator of whether or not we are fulfilling our requirements under the Clean Water Act. And that absolutely is true. It's how we measure attainment. And so it's encouraging to see that people are recognizing that as we go into these battles. But certainly also it's important that on the recreational side, people clearly understand, and as Meghan highlighted in her presentation, in her slides, that there is a gradient of exposure to the various problems with poor water quality. That if you are swimming or snorkeling, for instance, there's no question that you're going to have water running in and out of your ears and eyes and nose and mouth, but that even things that people might not think of as particularly risky, like kayaking, our memberships do recognize that, yeah, there is splashing that's done, particularly if you take a group of kids out on the water, right? There's a lot of splashing that goes on. Or you take a group of people that aren't as experienced with stand-up paddleboarding. I know my daughter has taken me out on a stand-up paddleboard, and she was a pro and was standing up, but I was falling in constantly off that stand-up paddleboard. And so it's important to recognize that there is a wide understanding that there are risks associated with a lot of these activities. It's not black and white, where one group of activities has the exposure and another group of activities have no exposure. That there is plenty of exposure across a range of activities, which motivates the reasons why we need to improve these rivers and streams, so that people that are already recreating on and in these waters are protected from various maladies that they might encounter from coming in contact with the water. So really encouraging to see that as we continue to fight for these basic protections of our streams and rivers.
And then one last just thought on this, Erik, before we move on. This gets back to kind of the changing of the culture of how we think about our waterways more broadly, about fishable and swimmable waterways, and certainly about the Delaware. And I think from the kind of the spot polls we've seen on this survey, and obviously the more extensive survey and that we did of the informed public in our membership, the public is definitely, and the informed public is definitely vastly in favor of swimmable and fishable waterways, and specifically in the Delaware. Regulators have not caught up. There's a culture that's still stuck in 1990 that kind of sees the Delaware, and especially the lower Delaware, as quote unquote too dangerous to recreate in. And that, I think, is countervalent to the intent of the Clean Water Act, and that really kind of tees up just the next slide, if we could move on to it, just on how our two organizations are applying the, kind of using the survey findings to buttress some of our broader advocacy. So specifically, and Erik was referencing this, there are 44 organizations, which, and you can kind of see at the top there, the kind of original organizations, the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, Clean Air Council, Penn Future, Environment New Jersey, Penn Environment, River Network, Bartram's Garden, Glen Ford on the Delaware, and the Darby Creek Valley Association. Those organizations and more than 1,000 individuals are already on board, asking the DRBC to reflect the existing use for the lower Delaware River, and to ensure that we're protecting primary contact on the lower Delaware. And so, we want to be able to use the results of this survey to show more broadly that this is not just our organizations; it's our broader membership on both sides of the river. That want not just kind of want to see fishable and swimmable uses, but are engaged in the existing use of the river. And the petition, and obviously this is just a quick snapshot of that petition, but the petition is very lengthy at describing the current uses of the river that are creating primary contact. So Erik was talking about supping. my record on stand-up paddleboarding is not great. I usually end up in the water immediately. And I think that the fact that we have extensive SUP lessons on the Delaware with the assumption that people are going to end up in the river exposes the fact that the culture is changing. The great work of Urban Promise in Camden to get youth in Camden onto the river by building and then paddling their own boats, again, is a example of the changing culture. The Center for Aquatic Sciences, at the Camden Aquarium, Adventure Aquarium, the Independent Seaport, all of them have recreational programs pre-COVID that were getting thousands of people out into the water. I kind of think the other key thing here is that there have been people that have been using the river for a lot longer than even these programs, right? So we're seeing, a ton of organizations like, swim clubs and yacht clubs along the river, some that have been around for 100 years, saying, yes, we want to make sure that water is protected because we're already using it. And there are also recreational businesses that obviously benefit from the existing uses as well. So, this is kind of a culture change, and ideally, we want the survey to be used as a way to not just change the culture, but to change the regulations so that we can have uses of the waterways of the Delaware that reflect the existing uses. And just my kind of last thought here is, we are in COVID, right? Who knows when we're coming out of it? But one of the just biggest lessons is that the public is flocking to our waterways. And the public, I think, here is not just the informed public. It's not just our membership. It's not just quote unquote environmentalists. It's everybody. People need to be outside. And we've seen that again and again and again. And so this, I think, means that if we did the survey again, kind of in the post-COVID world, I think it would show even broader engagement and use of rivers like the Delaware. And so that's my kind of fervent hope, is that there aren't that many silver linings of this awful situation that we find ourselves in with the pandemic. But I hope it kind of reinvigorates not only a cultural change, but a regulatory change so that we're protecting all waterways, but especially the Delaware and its tributaries to be fishable and swimmable. And Erik, I wanted to give you a space to kind of talk about this as well, because this is just such a critical issue.
All I need to do is emphasize that any day, from really beginning in April, not just in the core summer months, if you go to these parts of the river that don't enjoy these Clean Water Act protections, there are people, the boat launches are crowded. People are throwing their sailboats in, their power boats, their jet skis, their kayaks. People are splashing in and around those boat launches. It's just happening. And like you said, the many boat clubs and businesses up and down the waterfront are already using it. So it is mostly about trying to get our policymakers to recognize that this is already happening. And it's exciting and it's wonderful. And what we need to do is protect all these folks that are celebrating the successes of the Clean Water Act.
And so we kind of, Erik and I kind of skipped ahead here a little bit, but if we could just go on to the next slide, and we'll just work to wrap up in the next minute, just because I do want to leave ample time for questions. So just on the next slide, on existing uses, we see the breakdown between primary and secondary contact. And as Erik and I were discussing, primary contact isn't just putting your head underneath the water. It's being very close to the water. It's having the ability to have potentially to go under, but not necessarily full immersion. So kayaking, canoeing, you can have primary contact without flipping that boat. Same thing for a jet ski, in which you see a lot of, I'm seeing a lot of jet skis on the Delaware right now. And then next slide, the uses that are currently protected, essentially are boating, but the uses that are currently taking place, and you just got to love that picture of the guy doing the headstand on the paddleboard. That is what is happening. People are getting out there and they're using the river, and that's I think will be even more strongly recognized in if we were to do the survey again. And then the final slide is just a big thank you to everyone, and then obviously a huge thank you to Meghan kind of for her work through Green Motivate for the survey, and then obviously a huge kudos to Erik and the entire Delaware Riverkeeper Network team. And we wanted to transition now to to kind of diving into some of the Q&A.
So So Doug, there's a question that we have here that you've indicated you'd like to answer. 46% like fishing, going back to some of the survey results. How many liked wading, swimming? Sorry if I missed the answer earlier.
Yeah, that's an important kind of important one to kind of go back in the actual survey results. So, if we if you can kind of go back all the way to the beginning almost of the survey, we were kind of talking of what are the what is important for you to participate in these activities. I believe this is slide 10, if we can catch up with that. And it's a kind of a 1 to 5 scale, 5 being extremely important, 1 being not at all important. We ranked wading, swimming, kayaking, fishing, jet skiing, and power boating. And we certainly, I'm not surprised to kind of see that our kind of informed public and our membership, was leaning more heavily away from kind of jet skis, right? That kind of came in the lowest at a 1.5. Power boating was just only a little bit bigger than that. It was at 1.83. But I do think there is, the distinction here between wading, swimming, and kayaking, was a lot bigger than fishing. So fishing was at 3, essentially, 2.99. Kayaking was at 3.86. I would kind of expect kayaking to be like way up there. Wading is the highest. It's 3.96. So, virtually a tie. And then swimming, it's like a 3-way tie. Swimming is tied with wading and kayaking. And so I think that's kind of a critical thing here, is that swimming is not, something that people are saying, oh, that's not for me. I don't want to do that. Oh, who would ever swim in the Delaware? So that I think reflects the cultural change that's going on, partially because, our members are obviously all over the watershed. People swim in the Delaware, right? It's just not in the lower Delaware. They swim in kind of the Lambertvilles of the world and the Hopewells of the world and in the water gaps. But obviously the Clean Water Act didn't say only protect the upper stretch of the Delaware.
So there was another question that went to the use, which fish were selected for that. There was a question about fishing, which type of fish, and it kind of goes a little bit to the survey development. I don't know who would like to take this question or speak to why certain fish were included for this question or not.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that, and we did try to provide a really quick answer in the Q&A under the answered tab. The question was asked about including largemouth bass, but not smallmouth bass, as targets for recreation, and I know that there are a lot of people that fish for smallmouth, particularly in the non-tidal river and a lot of our tributaries and some of our cooler water lakes. As well as other species that weren't on there, such as walleye and even muskie. Part of this is that the downgraded uses, the lack of fishable and swimmable uses are centered on the tidal Delaware River. So this is clearly a warm water system. There are occasional smallmouth bass that are caught in the tidal waters, but primarily when we get bass in the river, it's mostly largemouth bass when we're talking about those types of basses, as well as striped bass. And of course, that's a huge success story, is the fact that 50 years ago, there wasn't any oxygen, so there was no spawning of striped bass. And now the Delaware River is one of the major spawning grounds for the amazing recovery of striped bass coast-wide along the northeastern coast of North America. And so the reason we chose some of those fish, partly, right, there are a lot of fish that we could include, but this was reflecting the fact that the battles to bring policymakers up to speed is mostly in the tidal waters, in the urban parts of our watersheds, areas that have been neglected, areas where maybe a constituency hasn't been able to emphasize the need that, yeah, we all enjoy the rights of the Clean Water Act, and we all need to be protected at full fishable and swimmable use. And so, so that's part of the reason we couldn't include everything, and there was a little bit of a bias towards the estuary there.
So we have just a few minutes left, so I want to pause for a minute just to make sure if anyone else has a question that they can type it into the Q&A feature right now, and so we can certainly speak to any questions that maybe somebody has been holding on to, waiting till the end here, just so we'll pause and see if anyone else has any more thoughts, any questions that they would like to raise in the last few minutes of the session. Were there any last thoughts from our presenters that you would like to share at this point?
Yeah, so I know we just have kind of 2 minutes left here, and I'll just kind of take a minute, and then I'll allow Erik the last word. First, I just wanted to kind of note that these survey results, I know we kind of went through them quickly, and Meghan went through them quickly. There's a lot of work that was kind of put into this. We don't want to hide this football. We are more than happy to share these survey results. We'll be working to kind of post this in a accessible format. But please reach out to us if you're interested. And actually, if Sherry, if you could just scroll down to the last slide, just so our contact information and email information is available for Meghan, Erik, and myself. I wanted to, I guess, just to wrap up by saying that I think my kind of closing thought of my last statement was just where we are during this pandemic, and who knows when things are going to end. But we do have the silver lining of people going out to the not in public per se, but to our wild places, and the Delaware certainly qualifies as that. And you don't have to go to the Water Gap to get away from it all. And so whether you're going to Palmyra Cove or the Tacony Creek, right, there are places in our own backyards in the lower Delaware and upper Delaware that the public is kind of re-exploring and rediscovering for the first time. And so we do want to make sure, the summer is sadly behind us now, but we do want to make sure that for summers hence, that we are reflecting upon the existing uses that are there. And this survey, I think, bolsters the petition that our organizations are advocating for at the Delaware Basin Commission. And so, you never want to assume something. You always want to go out and ask people. And I think, if anything, COVID, COVID really, means that these kind of efforts are even more important. So let me turn it over to Erik for the last word.
Yeah, thank you for giving me that opportunity. And Meghan, I don't know if you have any last thoughts as well, but it is exciting to recognize that in our lifetimes, these improvements are achievable. And there's broad recognition among, again, the public, and particularly our informed public, that these are a priority. And so I really am excited to be part of this effort of our two organizations, of broader groups, of the whole region, of recognizing the value of the Delaware River, and really trying to make every corner of the Delaware watershed fishable and swimmable. It is possible, it is attainable. In fact, it is actually already occurring. And so we just need to establish those protections and continue to fight for improvements. So it's very exciting to be part of this. And thank you, Meghan, for the survey work to help us establish these realities and these perceptions. So thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you all for working on this. And I think the main takeaway I have just from the person that's kind of running the survey and going through the details of the data is that, your audience members, they are engaged, they are interested, they are very knowledgeable about a lot of this. So kind of keeping that in mind that, people kind of know more and want to do more than you might assume from the start, and kind of really just go with that and take advantage of that in the best possible way.
Well, I'm afraid it's time to wrap up our session. We're a little bit over time, but I want to thank our speakers once again for taking the time to share this research with us during this week of Watershed Congress presentations. Thanks again, everyone, and good afternoon.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Take care,
everyone.